Okay. Mark and Jamira, are we ready to get started?
Yes.
Yeah. If we need do anything else, that's fine.
We should start with a roll call.
Yeah.
I was just going to welcome everyone.
Yeah.
Oh, welcome to the September Parks, Recreation, Open Space Commission meeting. I hope everyone had a nice, safe, and restful August, and we can get started now with roll call.
Commissioner Abbott,
Here.
Commissioner Chin,
Here.
Commissioner Kent,
Here.
Commissioner Martin,
Here.
Commissioner OG,
Here.
Commissioner Chang Frank,
Here.
and Chair Sainberg.
Thank you. Here. Okay, thank you, Jamira.
No problem.
We're going to go now into our land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. We'll now go to the approval of minutes.
I'm happy to move that we approve the minutes from the June 13th meeting.
We have a second?
Second it.
Okay. Commissioner Abbott,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang Frank,
Yes.
Commissioner Chan,
Yes.
Commissioner Kent,
Yes.
Commissioner Martin,
Yes.
Commissioner OG,
Yes.
and Chair Sainberg.
Yes.
Thank you.
We'll now go into time for a public comment for persons desiring to address the commission on an item that is not an agenda. You have up to 3 minutes, and you can approach the podium and turn on the mic. And the Brown Act limits the commission's ability to take or address items that are not on the agenda. So these may be referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda item, or to a future agenda. At this time, are there any public comments? What about online?
No hands raised online.
Okay. Well, let's see, we've got some folks coming in. Or just a public comment, or anyone that's just walking in. Public comment. Okay, we'll move into our announcements now. Are there any announcements from the commissioners?
I do have a few things to mention. Events coming up. So Albany Local Week is coming up, and I guess not next week, but the one after, 22nd, I think. And the Albany Chamber of Commerce is having its Best of Albany Gala. So that is a free event at Belmont Village on Thursday the 26th, where we award the Best of Albany certificates. The next day, Friday, the Albany Film Fest is having a special outdoor showing on Solano, or near Solano Avenue, that we're putting together of the films from their film festival that are produced in Albany, so that's exciting. And then on 9/28 is the Albany Rotary Club's Taste of Albany. So a lot of things scheduled for Albany Local Week.
Super.
Okay. I have a few announcements as well. The first one, this year's Concerts in the Park ended last night, but was a great season. We'd like to thank the community for coming out and supporting this performing arts program. All four concerts were very well attended, with an average attendance of at least 500 people. A final thank you to the musically diverse bands that played for our community. We had Mango Bus, Hey Jude, Cosmo Alley Cats, and Late for the Train. We can't wait for next year's shows. Then there's a cleanup day for the Friends of Albany Parks. The Friends of Albany Parks program encourages community members to maintain and beautify their favorite neighborhood park on Saturday, September 28th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. They'll be working at Memorial Park Edible Landscape Project. With direction, volunteers will help plant, weed, and mulch this community gym. We hope to see you there. And just want to give you an update on the dog park. We are hoping to award the contract to a contractor this week. There's no date set for construction, but the project should be completed by this fall. That's all. Did you have?
Okay, thanks. It looks like, were there any more?
Ask a question about,
Yes.
do you know what the plan is for any downtime or any restrictions on where people can use the dog park during the fall?
I mean, I think we could probably put up fencing to restrict people from various areas. I think there will be some time, particularly when we're doing the concrete, where we might have to restrict people from, put some way to restrict people from getting into the construction area. I don't think we've gotten into any details in terms of closing the park.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move now into our presentations. Our first one is a presentation by the two interns that the city has hosted that has been under Margot Cunningham's supervision, and we're really grateful for for Azucena's and Sandra's work, as well as patience in waiting to present this month and not back in July when we had scheduled you initially. So we'll hand it over to you, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
One second while we load.
While Mark is getting the presentation, I'm Margot Cunningham, Natural Areas Coordinator, and I would like you to meet our habitat restoration interns.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Sandra. I'm a college student at Contra Costa College. I currently study biology, but I hope I can pursue environmental science once I transfer. And I am currently the habitat restoration intern this fall, as well as in the summer. And yeah, I'm glad to be here.
Stop sharing for a second so that Azucena can pop up.
And then can we get Azucena?
1 second, I'm going to have Mark stop sharing, and then there she goes.
Hello, I'm Azucena Macias. I'm currently in Cal Poly Pomona, and I'm majoring in landscape architecture. And I'm glad to be here too.
Thank you. Okay, now he's going to bring back up the presentation.
All right, great, thank you. So we're going to talk a little bit about the Habitat Restoration Intern Program. This is the second year of the program, and it's a program that provides paid experience in habitat restoration to college students or people planning to attend college. And it also helps the city in its goals to reduce fire hazards on Albany Hill, restore and maintain habitats on the hill, and repair and maintain trails. As part of these goals, interns are increasing our knowledge of plant and animal communities on Albany Hill and educating the public about it. This program is funded by a wildfire resilience grant from the California Coastal Conservancy. Next slide, please. All right, so see, this past summer, these are some of the activities that Sandra and Azucena did. A lot of weeding, mapping so that we can see where native plants are, which is important for restoration. And it also involves collecting seed for propagation and seeing where to focus our efforts. So the mapping was done on phone apps that, such as iNaturalist and something called CalFlora. They also worked on educational materials, including the online field guide, which is important to let people know more about the hill that is in their own backyard so that they can appreciate it and become more involved in decisions about how to restore and maintain it. We also put up birdhouses, which Sandra will discuss more. We collected seeds of native plants and propagated them. And interns also learned about various environmental topics through websites, webinars, books, and studies. Next slide. Okay, so the online field guide, this was started by our intern last year, Isabel Reedy, who gave a presentation here a year ago. It's available on the city's Albany Hill website, and there are also signs on the hill with QR codes so that you can access it. People can make their own observations of plants and animals on phone apps, and so that we can continue learning more about what lives on the hill. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Sandra.
So here you can see some of the new entries we've added so far. So while I was writing these entries, I wanted to make it very easy to understand for everyone, and I wanted to be educational. And also, I really wanted this guide to be easy to navigate, so I tried to add some shortcuts that people can click on to take them to a certain page instead of having to scroll all the way down or all the way up. Yeah, and so far we've added a total of 22 new pages to the field guide. And we also added 2 other sections. We added a section for reptiles and a section for mammals, which hasn't been on the entry before or on the field guide before. We can move on to the next slide.
So, so I decided to create a map illustration, and this map, I've highlighted key features of Albany Hill and Creekside Park. You'll notice I've marked the parking areas and provided descriptions on the size of each to make it easier. And I also marked where people can find restrooms and water fountains. The main trails and fire roads are shown in red and black lines to guide visitors through the park while emphasizing fire safety. I've also detailed the vegetation zones. So I drew the eucalyptus and the oaks and the willows and the grasslands that was inspired by the Albany Hill and Creekside Master Plan from the 1990s. And I decided to introduce the monarch butterfly clusters. You can see where they typically gather by the summit, which is an important habitat for their migration and survival. And lastly, the parcel lines, they're meant to identify what areas are private property and city property. Next slide. So apart from adding more plant entries into the field guide, I chose to create botanical illustrations. The botanical illustrations serve as a visual tool to emphasize the importance of native plant species by highlighting bowlanders, golden aster, narrow leaf mule's ear, hairy gum plant, and the soap plant. These illustrations help familiarize people with this species. I chose to illustrate the seed, stem, flower, and leaf of each plant to provide a complete visual representation of their features. And I also included how each plant looks when it flowers and seeds. Next slide.
So with the development of the eucalyptus project, some concerns have been raised from the public about potential loss of bird habitats. So I thought in order to mitigate these concerns, putting up some nest boxes could help. So I started off by researching the birds of the hill and researching what their preferences are when it comes to nesting. And I came to the conclusion that these are the 2 types of nest boxes that could help. So we have a traditional bluebird house, which is good for small birds like bluebirds and wrens. And we got an open platform, which is good for birds that prefer to nest on an open area instead of an enclosed one. So birds like robins, mourning doves, barn swallows, and black phoebes should appreciate this kind of nest. And if we go to the next slide, on the left you can see a map of where we put up these nest boxes. We put up about 3 of the bluebird houses and 2 of the open platforms. And some things we took into consideration when choosing the locations is that we wanted to minimize we want to highlight the nest boxes from the public in order to avoid vandalism. And also we wanted to make sure we accommodate to the preferences some bird species may have when it comes to nesting. So like some have a preference of facing south, or some have a preference of having an open area. So we wanted to make sure we can accommodate to these preferences for the species. And you can go to the next slide. So takeaways from this internship, I'd say I've noticed a big improvement in my skills for identification. I've noticed that like when, let's say for butterflies, I can very easily and confidently identify butterflies as well as with birds and some plants. I also gained experience with academic research and writing through working with the field guide. And also I'd say this internship gave me an opportunity to see how the environmental field is like, which is what I want to pursue. And this internship definitely like solidified my choice in wanting to pursue this career. So I'm very happy to get this opportunity and be able to work with Margot and as well as Azucena.
Yeah, I can say it was an eye-opening experience. I learned so much about ecosystems, conservation, and just how interconnected everything is. One of my favorite parts was seeing all the different species of bees, butterflies, and just pollinators. It really made me appreciate how important even the smallest creatures are to these ecosystems. Thank you.
Next slide. All right. We'll take any questions that folks may have.
Any questions from the commissioners?
I have a couple. Did the interns develop their own subject of what to concentrate on, or did you guide them on these ideas?
Well, I gave a list of possible projects that they could work on, and they chose the field guide, which was started last year, but then also they came up with their own ideas as well. Like Azucena came up with the idea for the map. So yeah, I hadn't thought of that, and I think it's a really great idea. And then Sandra came up with the idea for birdhouses and their importance.
And was that a summer internship, or what was the length of time?
So it was summer, but Azucena had to go back to school in Southern California, but Sandra was available to work through the fall, so she's working through December.
I was eager to clap for you all because I think it's so awesome and it's so professional. I mean, really, the map, the thinking behind the bird boxes, the addition to the guide, like, what an asset to take our, like, experience in nature and then our protection of the resources here in Albany, like, to the next level, really. So thank you, and I just hope that you continue to have success in your career and in starting this, for both of you, your careers in environmentally adjacent fields.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any questions from the public, just before if that's okay? And the public have any questions? Yes, you can come up here to the speaker. Is this a question for the presentation? Yeah. Questions for the presentation.
I just want to know, will the pamphlet be available online, or how does one get a hold of
The presentation
the
you
product
said?
of your work? Yes, like
The guide or the
guide.
The online field guide? Yes, it's on the.
Online now.
It's on, yeah.
Ah, I see.
It's on the Albany Hill, I didn't put a QR code here, but it's on the city's Albany Hill website.
Great, thank you.
And I do have a question. I was trying to make space for some more, but I'm curious if we're able to see how many clicks that guide is getting. Do we have that technology?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, the guide, because you have it kind of posted up against a wall
Yeah.
around the park, right? The
Yeah, that would,
hill.
I can say that the QR code that we had posted up on the hill, it ran out of clicks. Like, I didn't know there was a limit to the number of clicks you can have on a
Oh,
QR
well,
code.
there's the answer.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I don't know what that number is, so we had to get a new QR code.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oh. Well, then maybe see you next year, I guess. Is this continuing
Yes,
every summer?
definitely.
Super.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's all very impressive. Thank you very much. You're welcome. A few marks.
Definitely. Okay. Thank you to Sandra and Azucena. We're going to move now to our next presentation, which is the presentation of the 65% of the draft of the Forest Management Art Restoration Plan for the Albany Hill. I got that right? Yeah. So we're going to welcome Margaret and the Restoration Design Group representative here today. And apologies, I don't have your name down right here.
Yeah, I just want to say, so we've been working on this draft plan, and we're eager to show it to you all and get your feedback. So we've got folks from Restoration Design Group and Nomad Ecology, and they're going to go through this presentation for you.
Right. Pencil for notes. Let me know if that's high enough. Can you hear me okay?
Let's see. Can you?
Good
I
evening,
guess
commissioners.
the mic is just not very high, right?
I'm very tall.
You get comfortable.
I can lean.
Yeah, be comfortable.
All right. Greetings, commissioners. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Annika Swinehart, and I am the design director at Restoration Design Group, and I'm joined by Dana Terry from Nomad Ecology. That is going to be a tough act to follow. That was a really heartwarming presentation. This is a little more practical. Next slide. And again, the team is, Margot is very instrumental in this whole project, Restoration Design Group, Nomad Ecology, and Creekside Science. Stu Weiss is a very important component of the project team, and he may have called in online. I don't know, no, okay. But he's involved. Next slide. And this is just a reminder of the purpose statement of the project, why we're here. The city is seeking a comprehensive plan for the phased removal of dead and dying eucalyptus trees on Albany Hill and the restoration of habitat for monarchs and native plants and wildlife in a way that creates a self-sustaining ecosystem with low fire hazards and minimal maintenance requirements. Next slide. And tonight, we're going to give you an overview on the project development. We really want to bring the commission and the public along on this journey. There's a lot of compromises involved. It's a complicated project, and full transparency tends to make things go better and easier. We're going to go through the draft plan diagrams and our key strategies in combining everything we talked about with you last time. And we really do want to solicit input from you and from the public at this phase before we advance the plan any further. Next slide. Oh, maybe there is an animation. I thought I turned them all off. Maybe hit the space bar mark. We'll see what happens here. Yeah, there you go. Just keep hitting it until they all show up. Last time we were here, we went through the 3 main priority areas for Albany Hill, prioritizing fire safety, monarchs, and native habitat. And from those explorations, we have generated these components to make our final plan. Next slide. And so this was the phase diagram that we showed you last time. Next slide. This is just a brief review. The fire department priorities. Good access to the hill for equipment and personnel, disconnecting the canopy and the understory, and creating a really aesthetic and enjoyable park to create a model for fire-safe and beautiful public spaces. and to remove the eucalyptus and replace them with more appropriate canopy species. Next slide. We went through the exercise of ranking all of the arborist report information into a priority tree removal list, which has been given to the city, and I believe that the priority tree removals will be in progress this fall for the top, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I'll just say. They're actually starting on Monday along Jackson. We're removing trees growing on the ledge along Jackson Street. That'll be a 2 to 3 week project.
So exciting action is already happening. Next slide. And this is where those priority trees are located. And you can see the ones that are being started right along Jackson have the red for the most important. Next slide. So this is the compiled fire priority exploration. The red was phase 1, the top priority areas for the fire department. Phase 2 was the second tier priority in terms of fire risk trees for removal, and yellow were the least risky trees to remove. So that's the overview for fire. Next slide. And for native plants, that's another big concern out there, and we just heard some wonderful input from the interns on their work there. Nomad Ecology walked the site and classified the area into 3 main habitat types that we want to bring forward into the future once the eucalyptus are gone. Oak woodland with shrubs, and open oak grassland, and native coastal grasslands. Next slide. And so this color diagram here shows you those 3 habitat type areas from the previous presentation. The dark green is that open oak grassland, the sort of mid-green, and I did bring a laser pointer this time. This is the open oak grasslands. This is the native grasslands, and this is the oak woodland with shrubs. Next slide. Oh, I guess we have animations. Keep hitting the tab bar, Mark. We're going to get through it. There you go. And while we're here, as you saw from the previous presentation, there are a lot of quality native plants present on Albany Hill underneath those eucalyptus, but only in certain areas. And so part of our goal is to retain the existing natives as much as possible in the course of this project. Next slide. And just keep hitting it until all the animations are done. The other thing, or maybe that's it. Go, sneak preview. Keep going back. There you go. There's 2 different kinds of removal zones that we talked about, the selective removal zones and the general removal zones, and these represent different removal protocols. Where the polka dots are, this is where there's good native plants that exist that we want to protect. These striped areas, it's largely annual invasive grasses and eucalyptus. We do not have to be as careful in those areas in terms of removal techniques or how the contractor gets the trees out in those areas. Next slide. Monarchs, also a very critical component of this project. Why Albany Hill? Part of it is topography. They can see it. The current forest structure supports them landing there and using it where they can get good solar access and good wind protection on the hill. Next slide. Before we had eucalyptus, what did they do? Monarchs have been migrating up the coast of California for millennia, and they used to use Monterey pines. A lot of the habitats that they used to use have been developed. Those stands have come down, and they have to use what we've left behind for them. So this is just an image of monarchs in their sort of ancestral nesting habitat. Next slide. And this is the final compilation of that monarch priority exploration. The pale lavender, these areas here, the removal of eucalyptus in those zones has no impact on the monarchs. They don't utilize that side of the hill. It's not of concern to them. The pink areas here, these are sort of the critical monarch areas on city property. This is where they cluster, and you saw those on the nice map we just saw right here near the gathering spot. And this is where there's a windbreak provided for that. We also want to point out that there's a large monarch use area, sort of their primary roosting spot is actually on private property. And we're not touching trees or doing anything to that habitat. When the weather is good enough for the monarchs to be up here, this is where they'll be. When storms pick up or the winds are too much, they're going to head down here where there's more shelter. There's windbreak provided here and windbreak provided here for this area. This windbreak is one that we want to cultivate and maintain in order to encourage monarchs to stay on city property on the hill. This purple area is what we're calling monarch support areas. And those are good places to continue to plant windbreak trees and nectar support for those butterflies. Next slide. So our job since the last presentation was to take all of that information and smush it into one project. The priority criteria were established previously. We looked through them. We looked at the components, and we came up with a final composition and a strategy that we want to present to you tonight for feedback. Next slide. Our key strategy number one is recognizing that this project will be a public bid process, which means that the contractors aren't necessarily going to be selected based on qualifications. Cost will come into it. It's a competitive bid. So in order to optimize the chances for a successful outcome, we wanted to separate the project into two so that the removals contractor can be an expert in large eucalyptus removal, and people who are very good at that may not be able to identify native plants. Restoration technicians and companies that are going to be able to do good restoration planting and good plant work are not necessarily qualified to do large eucalyptus removal. So we've separated the project into two sets of documents and two bids. And we'll go through how those are going to sequence later on in the presentation. Next slide. Second strategy is to remove the eucalyptus from the outside in. From that fire diagram, the red priority areas were largely on the outside, the downhill side of the hill. Those are closer to homes. They have higher impact targets, and or they produce torching, or they can send embers into the rest of the city of Albany. So we wanted to remove those first and leave the inside parts where the monarchs are and some of the closer stands uphill for the second layer of removal. With eucalyptus stands, stand dynamics do have an impact, whereas if you remove a large patch of eucalyptus, you're exposing the next row of them to more wind, more sun, and that can speed their decline. They may have more water available, they may have a flush for a minute, but largely our concern is that by removing the outside ones first, if the interior ones start to decline at a faster rate, they're not going to fall on anything that important. We're getting the trees away from the houses first and leaving the monarchs for the last. Next slide. Third strategy, we want to protect what's on the hill before importing. You have good quality native habitat on the hill, and by staggering the restoration and removal phases, we can do the proper preparation and salvage work, seed collection, to maximize those plant communities. It's also more cost effective. If you've got good quality native plant habitat, don't destroy it while you're removing the eucalyptus. Leave it in place and then allow it to flourish afterwards. It means that, for the selective removal areas, that's a key component. For the general areas, it doesn't come in as much. Next slide. And number 4, adaptive management. This project is the start of a long-term stewardship and management effort that will taper off in time, but allowing time and space for adjustments along the way will improve the outcomes. We've phased this out into 7 phases, and we'll walk you through those. And what this does is it allows us to do prep at the front end and see how things are going along the way and adjust if we need to near the end. It also means that at the end of the project, there's still going to be a long lead time in terms of the continuing work of Margot and the Natural Lands, your interns, to help bring the hill into more stable, sustainable ecosystem. So we want to acknowledge this is a big project, and you're making a major change on the hill, and this isn't going to be a come in and it's done. It's going to be a come in and maintain repeatedly until such time as it can walk on its own. and I want to touch on the field test replacement trees. One of the pressing questions that we'll be talking about is what's going to replace the eucalyptus? If we want to keep monarchs on city property on the summit, they need to have something to roost in. The trees that are up there now are in decline, they're unhealthy, they are not going to make it. We're kind of racing time. So at the very beginning of the project, we're going to plant field test trees to see how they do, how the public reacts to them, if they can survive in that environment, if they thrive, which ones look good. Do the monarchs check them out? I mean, client approval. We want to see what's going to work there. And doing that in the pilot phase of the project so that at the very end, we can make a decision based on some field test of what we're going to plant up there on the summit to replace those eucalyptus. Next slide. This is an overview, and I'm going to start walking you through the phases. And I think we talked about staggering. Phase 1 is going to be a restoration phase, and then phase 2 is removals. And then you come in and you do restoration, and then you do removals, and then you do restoration, and then you do removals, and then you do restoration. So that we're separating the effort both by discipline, by which contractor can do what work, and we're preparing for the removal, we're doing the removal, we're going in and we're repairing the area that was just removed and prepping the next one. And the removals contractor comes in, takes out the eucalyptus, and the restoration contractor comes back and repairs the one that just got removed and prepares for the next removal phase. So there's a sequencing of back and forth on that so that we can be careful about it and we can maximize protecting what you guys already have on the hill. Next slide. This is just to let you know that the two sets are going to be different. The restoration bid set will be a traditional construction set with plant patches, plant schedules, what you would normally see in a landscape contract. Next slide. The removals contractor is going to be receiving these diagrams with the arborist reports, with all the tree tag numbers, specifications. It's going to be a removals set, very similar to the one that went out for the priority tree removals that are happening now. And the way that we're doing the removals, what you're seeing in blue is the first round of removals, and those correspond with where those red priority areas were for torching. And targets that hit these houses. So some of these trees are already coming out as part of the work starting on Monday, and the remainder of them will be included in the phase 2 removals. Next slide. So the pilot work, what do we mean when we say pilot work? On this diagram, you can see a couple of things I want to point out as important. These outlined areas correspond to that removal, the first removals phase. So the pilot phase is going to go into where the first removals are going to happen, and any plants that can be salvaged and dug and saved to be reinstalled later will be. There'll be seed collection, cuttings for plants that don't propagate well from seed, like ferns, other bits. Those will all be collected prior to removals. We'll also be flagging any of the priority native plant stands, which were mapped out by Nomad Ecology, and you can see those here. Those light green patches, those are areas of dense quality native plants. So we want to protect those, all these areas. And you can see this yellow outline here. This is the monarch management area. And we'll be talking about how that is treated later. But for now, pilot work, you're going to do the advanced prep work prior to the removals contractor coming in. And you're going to get ready for those areas. You can see here that there's a priority native plant area with a lot of eucalyptus in it. And what this gives us an opportunity to do is remove those eucalyptus at a certain trunk height. We don't want to do any ground disturbance in those areas. This is also an opportunity for creating snags, leaving some dead stumps for habitat and other things, but we'll be treating those eucalyptus differently than the ones that are over here. And that's why this is a selective removal zone. You can see in this area, there's almost no priority native plant stands. There's just this one patch. So this is a general removal area. This is a selective removal area. Next slide. So the removals contractor will be receiving these diagrams. And again, you can see where the selective removal zones are and the general removal zones. Next slide. After those trees are gone, you can see the black dots have disappeared. They'll still be in here as stumps, ground. We're not going to be tearing things out of the soil. We want to keep the soil as undisturbed as possible. But phase 3 will be coming in behind the removals and doing restoration plant work in here, in these areas. And these are all the eucalyptus that will still be standing at that time. Next slide. And so phase 3, this is a clip from the construction draft set. You can also see the same thing. These are the areas that are going to receive the planting patches as part of this phase. And the stumps are in gray. You can't see it on this presentation, but they're in there. And what we've done is we've cited the new plants and the new tree patches adjacent to the priority native plant stands. What this does is it basically takes something good that you have and it expands it out. It sort of inoculates the site in that way. The other thing it does is that it makes Margot's job a lot easier, or anyone who's coming in to do invasives control, because you have the natives in an aggregated area, and you can do invasive weed control in the interstitial spaces between those groups. There will be a lot of invasive control work. When you remove this many trees, you have this much disturbance, you're going to be battling that. And what this does is it allows for easier methods and means of doing that for the people doing the work. You can weed whack in here without worrying too much about it. And over time, you can start to collect seed from these and plant out or thin out and spread. So if it looks like a cell biology diagram, that's not a mistake. We're inoculating our medium, and we're really trying to spread the good, but in a way that makes it easy to do the invasive control we're going to have to do. Next slide. So phase 4 is another round of removals. And so this is where we've already done removals and restoration is sort of washed out. And this is a general removal area and a general removal area here, and this is selective up in here. And so again, the contractor will come in and remove those eucalyptus and avoiding any of the work in this monarch management zone. Next slide. And so phase 5 restoration is coming in behind that removals contractor again. And you can see the target habitats that we're working with. This one has all 3. And again, you'd be coming in and doing the planting in here, and in here, and in here. Next slide. I want to point out, so this side of the hill is very, very steep, and we're only showing tree patches sort of near the top edge there. A lot of this will fill back in with baby oaks that are under there, poison oak. A lot of what's there right now will be able to come back without a tremendous amount of work on those steep slopes. But you can also see the patches from the previous phase, the patches that are going in on this phase, and what's remaining over here, and grassland work down in this area. Next slide. So phase 6 is where we get into the monarch zone. And what we've done here is we've separated out the monarch management area into a buffer area and the critical monarch zone. The critical monarch zone is not going to be in the contractor scope. That NIC stands for not in contract. The city of Albany will be in charge of those trees, assessing those trees, and making decisions about when those come down in conjunction with the arborists, biologists, and the monarch experts. It allows you to not have as many errors. It allows you better control over that area where the monarchs are. And the area around the outside, this area, Those trees will be assessed and removed by the contractor if needed. They're on steeper slopes. That's part of the fuel break that we really want for the fire department in between the private property and the city property. So that will be in the removals contractor scope, but it will be determined by an assessment phase here. During this phase as well, we're going to be looking at, these turquoise dots are those field trial trees that we planted 6 phases ago. And those will be assessed, and we'll pick the best candidate for what we're going to replace these eucalyptus with. So if you go to the next slide. Phase 7 is monarch support, and it's really dealing with this monarch area. And you can see that there's habitat hatches here and here, and this zone, there's 3 different habitats. And you can see where these replacement trees are, but now there's these other dots, these replacement tree locations, and you can see those all scattered through here to reinforce this windbreak and to create more potential roosting sites, as well as more windbreak from this direction. You'll also see the black dots are still there. Part of that is because we don't know how many of those trees will fail between now and phase 7, or how many of them will be able to leave up until such time as they naturally go their way. But those will be on a case-by-case basis and assessed more carefully because of their presence in this area. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see an enlargement of the construction plan, which sort of points that out. The black dots are the existing eucalyptus, and the triangles are where we're planning on distributing those replacement trees for planting. These are the test trees, these little dots here. So these may come out, or they may still be present at this phase. It'll all be assessed. The trick will be trying to plant the replacement trees if we still have a full stand of eucalyptus. They're not doing well. They're not going to get better. We'll update the drawings as the project progresses based on that assessment phase. But the idea here is to really have a close control over what happens to those trees and when. And that it wouldn't be, it removes the note of error of a contractor taking something down by accident, that you can't undo that. There's no way to reverse that. So, and right now, the monarchs are not listed, and that may change. So this gives you more control as a city over what happens in this critical area. Next slide. So the big question is, what do we plant, right? The replacement trees need to have a better fire profile. They need to be drought tolerant and adapted to a rocky coastal soil, but they also need to provide the physical structure the monarchs like. We also don't want them to be invasive, and we don't want to plant a future problem. We're spending a lot of time thinking about how to get rid of one you inherited. We don't want to leave one for future generations. This project is currently proposing 4 different species for field testing. Next slide. Pinus sabiniana is the foothill pine. This is a California native pine. It is not native to Albany Hill, but it does well in dry, rocky soil. It's very drought tolerant, and it thrives in windy coastal areas as well as in the foothills. So it's a pretty good candidate, and it has the right morphology and structure for those monarchs. Next slide. A pine that is not native to California is Pinus canariensis. You've probably seen these all over Southern California. They're often planted to screen parking garages because of their morphology. You can see this is what they do. They go straight up. And they have a very similar look and feel to what the monarchs were used to ancestrally. They have 3-inch long needles. They're very, very long. In their native habitat on the Canary Islands, they're on very rocky cliffs on an island near the ocean, and part of their morphology is to collect fog drip. And so they channel water through their very long needles down onto the soil below them. They're also considered a very fire-resilient tree. They have extremely thick bark. They evolved on volcanic islands, so we don't have that problem, but it's in terms of their adaptations, their morphology, they're a candidate. They are not native to California. This is not a native plant. It has a better fire profile, and it's not going to cover the whole hill with itself, but it is not a native. Next slide. We also have Eucalyptus diversicolor, the Kerry. This is the tree that was recommended by Stu Weiss. It's been planted down at Pismo Beach. I'm planning a field trip to go down there and visit them and see how they're doing. It is not the blue gum Tasmanian eucalyptus, which is used to a much higher water regime than this one. This one is evolved from Western Australia. It's used to very dry areas. It is, however, still a eucalyptus. And there's a lot of reasons why that gives us pause, but it is a candidate. Next slide. We also have another island. You're noticing a theme here, island species. Albany Hill is kind of an ecological island. It's this prominent hill right next to the bay. It's fairly unique in its morphology. This is also an island species like the Canary Island pine. It's a California native, not from this area. It's from the Channel Islands. But it does well in rocky, windswept conditions. There's two different species shown here. They have slightly different morphologies, but they're also very tall, rapid growing, good leaf structure for what we're looking at in terms of monarch use. It's a candidate. It does have a shaggier bark. However, unlike the eucalyptus, it decays. So you get leaf litter, you get leaf drop, you get bark on the ground, but it does decay and turn into soil. But that's one of the things we want to test, is to see how do these perform on Albany Hill, how much litter does it actually make, is this going to give the fire department an absolute heartburn, or is it okay? And part of that is just field testing it to see how they do. Next slide. The other big question is, how much is this all going to cost? We're only at 65% design right now, so these are rough order of magnitude guesses that we've thoroughly researched and plotted out, but that's the caveat. But we're looking at each phase. We did the cost estimates very modularly. So for each phase of the cost estimate, we have that split out. We can lump or break these up in different ways based on how the city wants to pursue funding. If you wanted to do the pilot, the removal, and a restoration and bundle those as a project, you could. But this is basically the breakdown of what we're looking at for removing all of those eucalyptus and doing the restoration work over the course of 7 phases. Next slide. Next steps and timelines. We've got a great website for the project, and there's links to all the other presentations, all the background documents, the public information sessions, as well as the field guide. Everyone can see that. And the next meetings are going to be this winter. We're looking at doing a second site walk or a presentation to your commission as the plans advance, and ultimately we'll be taking it to City Council for approval. We do really want public input. So if you're watching this later, please send us an email. There's an email on the website right there, Albany Hill Uke Project at albanyhillca.org. We want to hear what you think. This was a very fast, but probably not fast enough overview of a very complicated project, so I'm assuming there's a lot of questions. But that's where we're at. That's how we've broken it down, and those were our key strategies in taking all of that information and coming up with a project for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go to questions or comments from commissioners.
I had some questions. One was, you mentioned some to remove eucalyptus, some will involve stump grinding, and others will involve keeping snags. And I was wondering, I've heard that eucalyptus are going to resprout pretty readily, and there's various ways to handle that. What's the current recommendation for that, for those different types of things?
Those are going to be included for sure in the specs. part of why eucalyptus are so invasive is that they do the epicormic sprouting. And that's a known component of it. Stump grinding to me means when you grind it below the level of the ground, and we won't be doing that because we don't want to we want to reduce soil disturbance as much as possible on the hill. So they'll be coming out, but there will be stumps, and those will be treated. And there's a variety of ways to do that. We're not going to be using pesticides, but you can cover it with black plastic and mesh, but you have to physically go out and check and kill them 3 times sometimes. Sometimes they just die, they don't come back. These are extremely ill and stressed trees, so some of them may resprout, but some of them may not have it in them to do so. But it's something that'll be monitored, and that's another reason for doing the multiple phase project, is to, when you do round 1 of removals, and you treat those that have come out, restoration crew comes back in, you go back and you check round 1 of removals before you start round 2. But it will be a maintenance issue.
So the current plan is for the low stumps is to not use herbicide, but to cover them and maintain that. And then you mentioned snags. So when I picture a snag, I picture a dead tree with very, very few limbs. And so for eucalyptus, it's mostly this huge trunk that goes way up, and then it seems like it would just sprout out of every which direction there anyway. So how do you anticipate doing eucalyptus snags while maintaining, preventing sprouting?
I don't know if they're going to sprout every which way. They tend to come out of wherever the last cut is at the top, kind of like a crown. We'll be cutting them at a height that people can get to them. I don't think we're not going to leave like a 90-foot dead tree just for health and safety reasons for people, because this is still a park that's heavily used. I think part of the negotiation on how high the trunks that are in those priority native plant stands stay will be a negotiation and a conversation between the removals contractor, the maintenance staff that are going to have to get to the top of that cut, and how the size of the cranes that we're going to be using to move them. So my guess is that it's going to be right now probably in the 6 to 8 feet high range, maybe a little bit more. The hope is that, by removing these eucalyptus, there's a lot of native oaks and toyons and other trees that once they get the light and the water they've been starved from, they're going to shoot up. So you're not going to end up with a lack of mature trees in the long term. In the short term, you're going to have some stick-ups.
Okay, thanks. Couple more questions. One is this is, you said a 65% plan, but it sounds like phase 1 is starting Monday with tree removals on Jackson Street. Am I understanding that right?
No, phase 1 is the pilot phase. It's the going in and collecting seeds and collecting native plants. What's happening right now is just the emergency priority tree removals for the ones that currently pose a risk to the city liability-wise, that are right there on Jackson. And those were identified in the spring, and so those are coming out as soon as possible.
Okay, so it's separate from this.
Yeah, those trees are not included in this project because that contract's already been awarded, and those have been removed from these plans.
All right, and then what's the rough? My last question is, what's the rough timeline for? Each different phase is different scope, but what's your estimate for how long it would take a contractor to do one of the bigger removal phases and one of the bigger restoration phases? We're talking months, years?
Oh, not years. I think, I honestly wouldn't want to venture a guess on right now on how long that would take until we talk to more of them. I think the main thing that will determine the timing of this will be finding funds for implementation and how the city wants to approach that. Mark can maybe speak to that more, but it's, the project is going to be, need to have the money to do it first, so.
On the funding side, one of the reasons we broke this up is a recognition that this is an expensive project and that we need flexibility to match what we do with the available funding and package it up for various grants. far as the timing, my sense is a removal would happen in a single season, whether that's 3 months, 6 months, it would be kind of that time frame with then the restoration work to follow. And that's maybe can drag on much longer because it's you know, there's you put it in, then there's maintenance work that'll go on for a couple of years, and then, so that'll just be jumping. When we get funding, we'll do another removal phase, followed by a restoration phase.
And in general, with large tree removals, you want them to go as quickly as possible because if it's involving cranes, which this will, you want to reduce the number of days you have a crane on your site. So there's an efficiency to that, and part of the contractor selection process will be looking at what resources do they have available, what's their proposal for timelines. Like a lot of that is something that will come up during the bid process and those negotiations with the contractor. But in general, they want to move as quickly as possible for profit motive, and you want them to move as quickly as possible for budget reasons. But we'll get some sense of how long it takes with the first round of removals.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner
I have
Chris.
some questions. First, I want to tag on a little bit on that. Wouldn't you have to work around the rainy season and when you're going to plant and when the birds are nesting and all of that? So, and also tag on about the snags. So don't the eucalyptus also sprout from the roots, or do they not do that? It's like once you cut the tree off, they, all of a sudden you get, I know acacia in my yard, I cut 20 years ago and I'm still taking out little sprouts.
Yeah, the plant's going to do what the plant's going to do, and because they can do epicormic sprouting, it can happen in various places, but for the most part, for these removals, we're really going to try and cut it as close to the ground as possible to reduce that, but it is going to be a maintenance thing. We're going to have to come back, and Margot's been killing them for years, so she's probably more of an expert on what your particular crop does out there, and how, you know, they're not as healthy as other eucalyptus, so their behavior is going to be a little bit different. But if you want to speak to that, Margot, you're more than welcome to. The expert do it.
So in terms of root sprouting, I think I've read that they can root sprout, but the ones that we've cut previously on the hill, they have not been root sprouting. And actually, as Annika said, some of them, when you cut them, they just die. They don't even sprout at all. And I'm not sure why, what the determinant reason is why some of them just die and others sprout. But the way we've been handling the ones that sprout is that we come in 2 to 4 times a year and we cut down the sprouts, just like that. We actually haven't even been tarping them. And because this is less work, you come in, you cut the sprouts, and they can't photosynthesize, and it takes 2, maybe 5 years for them to die. So, but it is going to be a maintenance thing. It's going to be a lot of work, but it's something that we can do in combination with the other work that we're doing on the hill, the weeding, the mowing, and fire safety, removing bark and branches and things from the hill. So it'll be part of our the maintenance that we're currently doing on the hill. It's just going to be more of it, as with everything else.
Okay, a couple more questions on that. Not on the removal. That's great. So a lot of it's really steep, and you have, looking at you, there's a lot of information in your document. It's really pretty good, but so much. Some of the details, it's pretty steep. I don't know how you're going to plant on that super steep slope with all that mulch. And I'm sure you've done it before because it's your profession. Like, if you have all that eucalyptus mulch 3 or 4 inches thick, and then you're trying to get down to the earth, and your slope is 2 to 1.
So I think the question is about planting in the mulch depths that we're showing. And so for the plant patches that we're doing, those aren't going to receive the same level of mulch. The really heavy mulching is for those interstitial spaces between the priority native plant stands and the new planting areas where we're just trying to suppress the invasives. But we are going to try and use as much eucalyptus mulch as we can, just to recycle that and keep it on site and start building some soil. In terms of the steepness, there's a detail in the set at the very back where part of something we didn't talk about in this presentation because there just wasn't time for it is the reuse of the eucalyptus trunks, the logs. And that's a node where, you know, we're still sorting it out and the city will have to have conversations with the contractors, but there's an opportunity for taking those logs and having the removals contractor drop some of them uphill and diagonal using the stumps basically as stakes to start to do some erosion control in there and sort of backfill and plant in there to help just drop the trunks on the site. Spacing those out, you know, for fire-safe distances and all that is one thing, but we can use a lot of the waste from this project for erosion control, batting. We can also use, you know, you've got great benches up there now, you've got log edging along the trail. There were some planks made from previous removals for that retaining wall with rebar right along the sidewalk. Some of those could be replaced with bigger like we've got a lot of opportunities for reuse here on the hill.
You think you have more than enough biomass for the mulch? You know?
Oh, yeah. Okay. We're gonna have a lot of mulch.
Trying to find a source for your 1385, whatever.
Yeah. We're gonna have a lot of mulch.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know, there's a lot of questions, I don't want to hold too much up here, but so it looks like if you're talking about adaptive restoration, that can be years down the line, right? And so I guess at some point, you just hand it over to Margot and she's gonna run with it. I mean, the contractor can't do it forever.
No, they can't. Part of what we want to do with this management plan is there's, you know, I think you guys got a 47-page Word document, and that's the draft, but we're also writing a management document, which will include sort of the goals, the instructions, you know, and details about how to do this. And it'll be a living document that will live with Margot and the natural lands so that, you know, if she's training someone, she can add to it, she can use that. We all want Margot to live forever and work forever, but I don't know that she wants that. But the idea is to have this be a living document that becomes a resource for the city of Albany moving forward into the future. Like, the project is going to take a certain amount of time. You're going to establish new plants and a new ecology, and then, as Margot pointed out, there's going to be some maintenance to, you know, over the next, you know, 2 to 4 years after the project is over to keep the eucalyptus dead and to outplant, collect seeds, and maintain. And eventually you're just gonna have a lovely native hillside, and that'll be less work. But there's some activation energy to get to there. And in terms of during the project timeframe, the adaptive management is really about looking at what's working well. And if we try something out during the first removal phase, we're like, that wasn't the best, we can adjust and make improvements on the second phase. And the same thing with restoration work. If we, in the pilot phase, dig up a bunch of ferns and, you know, store them on site and do everything right, and maybe they don't take, maybe it doesn't work that well, maybe we shift our strategy. It allows for learning, and it allows for improvement, and it allows for better results by the end of the project, rather than trying to do it all at once.
And you listed 4 trees. Are you going to try all 4 of them, or are you just going to make it in your restoration experiment, or are you just going to go with one? And
the idea is to plant all 4 of those on the hill in the pilot phase.
Okay.
3 of each species, and see how they do. And watch them, give them the same treatment, see how they respond, and, you know, consult with Stu Weiss, consult with Nomad. The public will also be able to see it, and I think when you're talking about making such a radical change to something that is, it's on your seal, you know, it's very much a part of Albany, and so to have the public be able to see the science in action, to be able to see the decisions that are being made and to weigh in on them, goes a long way towards whatever you finally decide to do, rather than us mandating this is going to be the replacement tree, and they're like, why'd you do that? You know, it keeps the process very public. It allows for people to interact with them. It allows for us to see them, and it's a real it's a real site test. Albany Hill is a pretty special and unique place, and you can posit what something is going to do or how it's going to like it or how it's going to behave, but it's very different, field testing. And all trees are different, so you wouldn't want to just do one of them, because what if you got, a weak little Lyanothamnus? So you plant 3 of them, and then if one of them bails, it's okay. So
Well, it's a little premature to vote now.
it's a little premature to vote now, but you still can. You still can, and
I want a
we
really
can
tall
reduce.
one. I want to keep the height, but
Yeah, I mean, and we do want that feedback, and maybe we cut it down to just 3 options, but we really wanted to look at trying to find something from California, even if it's not locally native, it's at least native to the state, and then looking at other trees that would serve the same function as the eucalyptus and not be such a maintenance nightmare for the city or a fire risk or a hazard to life and limb. So it was a little bit of a tricky assignment.
Thank you, Annika. And I want to see if are there any comments from the public or online?
No hands. Wait.
2 raised hands.
I had a couple more questions. when we're
And
done.
yes, I do recognize commissioners might have more. I also acknowledge there's several more items on the agenda, and there's the opportunity to email your questions possibly. So let's go to the public and just come back to the commissioners for any last questions.
Okay, we will start with Lucinda.
Yes, in the interest of time, I'll be very brief. I just want to say thank you for the presentation. I am very happy to hear about this plan to remove the eucalyptus and replace it with native trees, native plants, which are so important to the restoration of our struggling ecosystem to address the biodiversity crisis. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucinda. And next we will, there we go. Next we will have Jim.
Great, thank you. Jim Hansen, Conservation Chair, CNPS East Bay. I just will say comprehensive, a lot of creative use of staging, which is really important, and really good to see some of the details that are being provided, such as the management plan. So thank you again for the presentation, and it's a very interesting project.
Thank you, Jim. And that's all the hands we have raised online.
Okay, thanks, Shamira. So maybe just 1 or 2 last questions from the commission. Does that sound okay? Oh, what happened?
Wait.
Did a hand go up?
A hand went up, but
All
then
right,
it went
we'll wrap
down.
that
Okay, he's back again. 1 second. David, go ahead. David? You're muted, David. There we go. David? Okay. David, I'm going to go ahead and disable you, and if you want to talk, you can raise your hand again. Okay, go ahead.
Any commissioner that hasn't asked a question yet or comment?
Okay, sorry. David, let's try this again.
Went back up?
Yeah, he popped back up.
You hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think I whatever. I very much like to say I like what I'm seeing. One of the issues that I have with the current Albany Hills setup and the park up there is, the trees are so dense that you really cannot take advantage of the awesome view that's available of the bay from on the hill. Some people, have said, "Oh, I just love the views up there," and every time I go up there, I'm just so disappointed because it's just so thick with trees and vegetation. So I'm kind of curious what in the design for the ultimate project, what's being considered to, provide for and take advantage of what is really, world-class views from the top of the hill overlooking the bay. If it was up to me, I would love to have, unobstructed views of the bay, 360 degrees from up on top. And, of course, that would require, planting of trees on the lower slopes that wouldn't, rise up and block the views, and shrubs and things that weren't, so high that they would block views. And I know that's not realistic to have, 360-degree views up there, but I'm hoping that there's some consideration of, large swaths of views, view corridors will be created up there, so we can, really take advantage of that incredible spot. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Okay, we do have another hand that is also raised. Patricia, go ahead.
Hi. I'm not sure if this is still related to the plan exactly, but I did go on the walk in December. I live in one of the condos east of the park, and we have a large tract of eucalyptus in the same sick condition. And I'm wondering if there is any prospect in the future of working with the city to obtain grant funding or any kind of help to do some sort of fire mitigation on our large tract of eucalyptus.
I can't answer that question. Mark probably can, but I feel like I need to loop back to David and just say you're in luck. You're going to have amazing views. And in the first round of removals, we very intentionally included trees that were blocking the views from Taft Circle, so that even during other removal phases, or if there's construction happening on the hill, people can still get to Taft Circle and have an amazing experience overlooking the bay from that spot. So we did factor that into the sequencing and the design. In terms of getting grant help for work on private land, that's not my wheelhouse.
So I think we have investigated grants for that type of work. There isn't a lot out there for work on private land, but that's something we have been looking into.
And she said she's in a condo on the east side. I don't know many eucalyptus on private land. There are definitely the condos on the west side by Pierce Street have a lot of wooded area. But either, yeah, okay.
Okay, that concludes our public comment.
Yeah, unfortunately, Patricia, since you've already had your comment, we running low on time, so maybe you can circle back. She raised her hand again, so.
Okay, yeah.
The Albany Hill project email address does go to humans, and we will see those emails, and we can respond there or receive comments on the plan that way.
Super.
Yes, you can also respond to send an email to the Parks and Rec Commission, so if you have any further questions or would like to add anything else.
Okay, super. Okay, so back to the commission for one or two final questions.
Give me a second. I forgot my question, but I remembered it.
Okay.
First off, I wanted to comment that this was kind of scaled or presented as kind of trying to navigate between these tensions or resolve these tensions between, and it sounds like you've done a really amazing job. Like you've probably gotten 80-90% for each of those circles we're looking at. Would you say that's?
I think that's true.
Yeah, I think it's very impressive.
That's what we're going for.
That's what you're going for. Yeah, the phasing and yeah.
The big compromise is on the removing a band of trees between private property and the city, because that's where we get the overlap with the monarch habitat.
I see.
And so that monarch management zone is the area where it all kind of crunks together.
Right.
So we're leaving those in place until the very, very end for that reason. And I think one of the things that we did was try to look at the project not just spatially but temporally and try and have that work in our favor. So.
And being a fire break, you're not going to replant there. I mean, that'll be bare. Yeah. The other thing I wondered is there something in particular you'd like from us? Any particular question you'd like to ask us for feedback on right now?
I think mostly sort of eventually we'd like your blessing, on that this 7-phase approach and splitting it into the 2 contracts and the way that we're approaching solving the problem is logical and makes sense, or if you have questions about how, the mechanics of it are happening. But largely it's just, we understand we sent you a lot of materials. And there will be more. And that takes time to digest. But if you have comments, you have questions, to just, make sure that we get them and we can address them. It's an important project. It's an exciting project. I think it's going to transform a really wonderful part of your city. So we're excited.
All right, thank you.
Super. Commissioner Bryan?
Yeah, thanks. As for feedback for me, first of all, it seemed like the phases, carving it up like that is going to be helpful for granting and grant purposes, and the manageable chunks and dividing things up the way you have seems like it's a good idea. My 2 questions I had were, how much noticing is, maybe the city staff can answer this, is how much noticing is being on this meeting and other related meetings are being directed to residents on the Hill. So we have people that, the very first removal will remove trees right next to their homes. There have been people that have expressed concern about fire hazards for years to the city, and something's finally happening, and they probably want some input and want to know that these meetings are happening. So is there a way to send, postcards, I don't know, a certain number of feet from the park, or emails to people that are a certain number of feet from the park, or that have already submitted a survey response or something? Do you know how noticing is being done for like this meeting?
I'm looking over at Margot and Mark for that answer.
So we have been sending out announcements in the e-news, the weekly e-news that people can sign up for, telling them about this meeting and past meetings. We also have we encourage people to sign up on our email list, which is at Albany Hill Youth Project at albanyca.org. If they sign up on that, we've been sending out announcements about this meeting, about the materials that you all received on the draft plan. So yes, people have been informed, and we also actually sometimes put up signs on the Hill for different meetings, not this specific one, but previous ones. We have done that as well.
Okay. And then my last question was the 4 species that were mentioned for potential replacement. There were some pines, different eucalyptus species. Of course, we know oaks do well on the northern slope. Are oaks a possibility? What are the pros and cons of oaks on the Hill?
The oaks are going to be on the Hill, but they're not going to serve the needs of the monarchs. It's fairly windy there, and the oaks are going to stay to a certain height, and the morphology of the leaves and the canopy doesn't give them the insulation. It doesn't provide them the access to light they need. What they really need are these tall, columnar trees with fairly, feathery leaves or needles, so that they get windbreak, but they get the sun column. Basically,
Okay.
They want a light well.
And
an oak
I didn't fully understand. So those 4 trees were to try to help be habitat for the monarchs.
Correct.
And there may be all kinds of other trees that you didn't go into the details of necessarily.
Correct. Yeah, it's mostly going to be oaks. What is going to do well there is kind of what's already on site. There's a lot of toyons and native oaks that are already thriving under the eucalyptus. They'll do better once they're gone. But the replacement trees that we're talking about are specifically for keeping monarch habitat on city property on the Hill.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much, Annika, and thank you to the Restoration Design Group for your work. This is really very clear to understand. Like, these visuals were very helpful. I learned a lot. And I'm seeing that there's an FAQ on the website that perhaps can be updated with some of these questions, and just for the public's awareness as well, that there is an FAQ here on the website about the plan.
And we can work on that with Margot.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Right, well, yeah. And, yeah, so item 3. Going now into a park tree update. John Hockridge, the city's urban forester, is going to present the results of the TRAQ risk surveys of trees at Ocean View and Terrace Park and activities based on these findings. Thank you, John.
I am John Hawkridge, urban forester for the city. I'm going to go over some assessments of the trees in a couple of our parks, Ocean View Park and Terrace Park. So we had a consulting arborist company, tree management experts, review the trees in our 3 main parks, Ocean View, Terrace, and Memorial Park. Tonight we're just going to talk about Ocean View and Terrace Park. They reviewed the trees. They assessed each tree individually according to ISA standards, tracked level 2 inspections on all trees 3 inches DBH or greater. They assess the trees and categorize them as in risk categories of low, medium, moderate, or high-risk trees. The ranking considers risk of injury to people or property damage or from complete or partial tree failure, meaning if a tree is going to fall and not cause any damage or harm people, it's considered a lower risk tree. Several trees were recommended for removal. We'll go through those trees. Assessments also include a recommendation for pruning and monitoring to reduce risk and improve likelihood of preserving the trees. Next. So for Ocean View Park, there were 86 trees included in the assessment. 79 were found to be low risk. 6 were found to be medium risk, and 1 was found to be a high-risk tree. 6 trees were recommended for removal. Recommendations were made for pruning several trees as well. There was concern about soil compaction in the Redwood Grove, the picnic area in Ocean View Park. Redwoods do not like to have their soil stamped down. They don't do well with compacted soil. In the past, we've had a contractor go in there and add a layer of mulch to the grove, and we probably need to do that again soon. And that may be one use for eucalyptus chips from Albany Hill removal project.
That's SB 1383. We need that mulch.
We're going to have a lot of chips from eucalyptus as well, then. Okay. Let's see. So I don't know how well you can see, but the trees of concern here. Tree number 15 is next to where it says tree number. Yes. That's an acacia tree, which is listed as a moderate risk. The recommendation is to prune this tree. It's stable, although it's a low-value tree. It's prone to decay and failure, and we actually, a year or so ago, removed a tree that was growing right next to it, or might have actually been a stem from that same tree. So that's one that we need to watch out for, because the tree that we removed, there was decay in the root zone of that tree. Tree number 17 is a liquid amber, moderate risk. It's been recently pruned. Maybe that's the only liquid amber. We actually went through and pruned all the liquid ambers in the parking lot there, just to reduce the possibility of limb failure. 29 is a London plane tree. It's actually a tiny tree. It's listed as a moderate risk tree. It's been pruned. It has a codominant stem, but it has a wide branching union with no inclusions in the bark, so it's not something I'm very concerned about, more so being that it's a small tree. Like I said, we pruned it. We'll keep an eye on that tree. Number 29 is a London plane tree, which is...
You just did it. 40.
You're on 40.
I'm on 40. Oh, I did that. Oh, sorry. Cypress tree, which is the cypress tree right in the paved picnic area, picnic table area. That tree is listed as being in fair condition. It's suggested to have the tree pruned. It's stable for now, but like most Monterey cypress trees, they tend to drop limbs as they get larger, so we'll have to keep an eye on that tree and see how that goes in moving forward. Number 47 is a pine tree. This was suggested for removal, and a couple months ago I was in there doing some pruning on some of the trees in the back, and I actually removed it. It was totally dead when I got there, so it was a little 6-foot tree. So where are we? Number 60 is a redwood, moderate risk. Recommendation is to remove it. This tree is in decline. We recently had it pruned. We had all the dead branches, dead limbs removed out of it, but this tree definitely needs to be kept an eye on, and I think going forward, maybe a year or two from now, this is going to be up for removal, this tree. Number 68 is another redwood that was listed as a high risk and recommended for removal, and that tree was removed. That tree was completely dead, and that was kind of next to the previous tree, and where we've removed a tree in the past as well, a redwood tree. So something's going on in that northeast corner of the grove, and it seems to slowly be moving back into the redwoods there. So for now, it's just those couple trees. One was removed, one isn't looking too well at this point, but let's see. Number 79 is another redwood tree, moderate risk. It's recommended for removal. Last 2 years ago, 2 winters ago, in the big storms, the top broke out of the tree. We had a crew go in there and remove the broken sections and clean it up a little bit. I don't think we need to remove it at this point. I think it's still in fairly good shape. We'll keep an eye on it. You'll see that a lot of the removal recommendations, this consulting group is a little bit aggressive on, yes, on their, any tree that had some kind of deformity or something, they're sort of recommending for removal. 7980 is another redwood. This is a low risk, but they also recommend this for removal because it's near the center of the grove and it's crowded in by the other trees. Again, the tree's not the best specimen of redwood, and yes, it's crowded and it's in the center where there's a lot of compaction, but it's not an urgent tree. It's another one we'll just keep an eye on. So liquid amber and redwood were pruned. We need to do some pruning behind the Friendship Club building. Just some trees that are growing into the building there. There had been a couple other trees removed behind the sandbox area, and we have a tree that was rejected for a street tree planting, and that tree will be planted. It's an oak tree. It's a cork oak tree that I think we'll be able to plant back there, which would be a good replacement. And I'm also thinking that Tristaniopsis larina or swamp myrtle or water gum tree is another tree that's really hardy tree that I think would do well there. It's got enough space. It's a low maintenance tree, so there's room for maybe three trees to be planted behind that area. So that will come up this winter. We'll be doing replanting back there. And then again, the redwood grove needs to be mulched. Okay. Just went over all this. Next. Oh, here's pictures. The one on the left here is the tree that was removed, the dead tree, and on the right, in both of them, but more so on the right, you can see the other tree that's in kind of sad shape, and that's been all cleaned up, and we'll keep an eye on that tree. So next. Okay, Terrace Park. 25 trees included in the assessment. 18 were found to be low risk, 5 medium risk, 1 high risk. 5 trees were recommended for removal. Recommendations were made for pruning on several trees. The main concerns are trees near the playground area. The tot playground area, I'm not sure what we call it, the fenced-in playground area. There's a deodar cedar there, which was given a moderate risk rating and pruning recommendation. For now, the tree's stable, but deodar cedar is a tree that's known to drop limbs sort of frequently. It's a weak-wooded tree, so we just need to keep an eye on that tree. There's a pittosporum tree that's, they said a low risk, but remove it because it's dying back. And behind the fence, there's a couple of different trees, and this is one of those trees that's not looking real well. It's a small enough tree. I think for now we can prune it and just see how it goes from there. I'm not giving you the numbers on these. So 89 is the deodar, and then we're kind of going clockwise. 90 is the pittosporum. Number 91 is a tree that's basically dead. I can't identify it, they couldn't identify it. They have it as a moderate risk, but they're recommending removal. Small dead tree, we'll get that out of there. It's not a risk to the playground at this point, but we'll have that removed. These 2 trees, the pittosporum and that tree, there's a small area behind the playground, behind the fence there, and then there's another fence, so there's not a lot of room for more trees there. This may be something where we want to put in some kind of shrub, something smaller, not necessarily a tree there, just something to fill that space. Let's see. Number 92 is a camphor. This, I think their report had these reversed, or by the time I got there, the situation changed. Number 92, they had as a high risk, and they're saying to remove the tree because of dieback on the tree. And there is dieback, but I think we can prune this tree and hang on to it for a while, as we do with most camphor trees. We just keep kind of whittling away at them because they're pretty strong wooded. They hang on to their wood for a long time. And there's still some life in this tree. However, number 93, which they listed as a moderate risk, but also recommend the removal, is now completely dead. I think I have a photo of it we'll look at later. It's a beautiful, nice-shaped camphor tree that's just completely dead for whatever reason. It's hard to really say what happened with that tree. So that's along the eastern side. A couple years ago, we had another camphor tree removed there. Generally, all the camphor trees there are pretty old, they're over-mature, and they're in decline. There's room right now to replant several trees there. I'm figuring we could plant about 6 new trees in there, and I am suggesting either red leaf maple or big leaf maple, which is the native California maple tree, might be a good choice there. Zelkover is a elm-related, sort of an elm-like tree that does really well. It's a nice shade tree. Or we could go with large pine trees such as a Mondel pine or Canary Island pine, which was talked about in the previous presentation, which, by the way, is the pine tree that's along the BART tracks. The large pine trees by Dartmouth and Marin, or Solano, Marin, yeah. There's several of them along the BART tracks there. Or we can go with oak trees, which is probably the better ecosystem value tree. It provides more value for wildlife, birds and squirrels and raccoons and whatever. We could plant live oak, scarlet oak. Shumard oak is a more drought-tolerant type of oak tree. There's another oak called netleaf oak, which is a new tree to me, but it's one that's being recommended as a climate change-friendly tree. That is something we might want to try planting in the city. So moving on to number 98, which is by the tennis court. There's another deodar cedar. This is rated as medium risk with a pruning recommendation. And again, this tree is stable for now, but again, it's also a tree that's prone to branch failure. So we'll keep an eye on that. And similar, there's an incense cedar, number 99, that is also stable for now. It needs to be pruned back for the tennis courts. It's overhanging the tennis courts a bit. So, let's see. I think that's it for terrace. If you go forward a slide or two. Okay, here's pictures of the dead camphor tree, and the one just to the right of it in the picture on the right is the other tree that was recommended for removal, but I think we'll just have that pruned. We're hoping to have this tree removed soon. I have a contractor lined up for the removal of the camphor tree and the pruning of the other tree. I think that's all that we have for this. Yes. So any questions, comments?
Commissioner Chris?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with Ocean View. So how old were those redwoods? Do you have
How
any idea?
old
Yeah.
are they? That's a good question that I get asked about many trees. That's really hard to answer.
Well, I guess I was wondering, it seemed like it was a good place for them, but but now they don't look that big and they're declined, so I was kind of curious.
I think they might be bigger if they were spaced better. I think they were planted with good intentions, but planted too closely. And I also feel that having a redwood grove that's also a picnic area wasn't really a great idea. We have the compaction from people that gets a lot of use there. There's compaction, there's food and drinks and litter and things spilled. There's barbecues with toxic smoke rising up into the canopies of these trees.
So, yeah, yeah, that's a good point. 'Cause I was curious, you know, you had a really interesting paragraph in your report about the clay soils of Albany. It makes me wonder, yeah, you're right. We have this struggle trying to get trees in Albany. That's really the reason. But it seemed like that area in particular, though, might be an exception because it's creek. The creek overflows and it used to be, I think, marshland, right, originally, before? I mean, that whole area up in the field.
Could well have been. It probably was an overflow, a floodplain area. I don't think it floods too often there, or I don't.
I mean,
really
historically,
remember
maybe
flooding.
not anymore.
But if it was a floodplain, that just means more clay. That's just causing more of a clay. So, and also, we're not getting the fog that we had been getting. That redwoods really depend on fog and fog drip. Fog condenses on their needles, and that's how they kind of water themselves. And so redwoods are struggling. I'm not sure what we can do there except to add a lot of mulch to the grove there, which is a lot of work. We can do it, but it also it gets trampled, and you know, I don't know what to say. I think, you know,
It's a nice space because it's shaded, and it is a nice space, but I see your point about not so good for the trees, although it's great. So I guess my major comment on this is just make sure we get replacement trees to put the canopy back.
I don't know that we want to replant redwood trees.
What doesn't have to be redwood, but you're right. You're putting the cork oak, and what was the other thing you're putting in there? You're putting a couple new trees in.
For the redwood removals, I forget that I to that. But yeah, we don't want to plant redwoods, but we can replant something that hopefully will be more suitable with changing climate patterns.
Yeah, that's all.
Thanks. I appreciate that you're like not taking all the recommendations about, removal of the trees from the contractor. Just curious, what stage, this is like an assessment report. If you are gonna like recommend a tree removal, are you gonna come back for that specific, or is this, I'm just wondering what the next steps are given this report.
Well, right now, I'm not recommending any. If we needed to remove a tree that's a living tree that is questionable, we would come to you.
Okay.
The trees, one was removed, was completely dead.
Yeah.
The other one is completely dead, it will be removed. The redwood, if it looks worse, maybe I can bring it back and talk about it before it gets removed, but sometimes I'm away from the park for a couple months, I come back and the tree's dead. So especially in a park, redwoods hang in there for a little while, but we don't want to leave dead trees standing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just going to say, particularly for Terrace Park, the trees along the playground, removing them will really impact, I think, the parents and the kids, of that use that park. I'm just thinking about that, but
Yeah,
I understand that makes
yeah.
sense for you to come back if there's a recommendation for removal.
Well, that one deodar that's in that little island in between the two sand lots there, that would be one that we might want to discuss at some point, but for now, it's okay. The others, again, are behind the fence on the east side with private property on the other side of them, and they may just have been volunteer trees there in the first place. They may not have been purposely planted, so I'll see if there's room to plant there. We'll try to plant something else, but...
Can I jump in here? So one of the purposes of this analysis and presentation, and we did this 3 or 4 years ago, maybe even longer, but the idea is to come back regularly with surveys and updates on the park trees, because it's a balance of what are the risks, and the real risks around the playgrounds, but also we have an opportunity to talk about like the stand near the Terrace Park playground area where we can plant things. Now we can remove the one dead tree, we can plant things in that area so that it's not such a drastic change when we have to. So we can better manage this over time.
I think Terrace Park in particular had been overplanted in the past. There's a lot of trees on the western side that are being overgrown by other trees that are more aggressive, and we want to plant with more thought for trees in the future.
Do you consider, say you have, a line of 6 trees and all of them are kind of on the way out, but some are better than others. Would you think about maybe be a little more aggressive with a few of them so that you can get started with the replacements before you have to move the others? Or is that the sort of...
I think that's exactly the conversation that we want to have, is where we have an area where something's happening, is have that conversation and how do we manage that decline? Similar to what we were showing at Albany Hill,
Right.
but on a much more micro scale.
It depends on the risk of
Sure.
the tree. Again, if it's...
Well, I'm thinking, there's the specific risk of the moment, but then there's also, looking 15 years down the line or 10 years. There's the difference between having, trees that are all this high or some this high and this high. Just trying to space it out, just trying to thinking long-term about, yeah.
Yeah, I think smart planting would not want to plant all trees all together at the same time.
Right, yeah, so maybe being a little more aggressive,
Right
take
tree,
some
the
out.
right spacing.
Maybe a little earlier than you might otherwise, so that you can get that started, because you know
Yeah.
you're gonna have to take the others out.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And then another thing, and you kind of answered this a little bit, but you use the phrase, keep an eye on a lot. So how often are you looking at these trees? I figure you're in the parks all the time, or is it?
Yeah, I don't have a regular schedule in the parks, but I am there in each of the parks fairly frequently. So when something comes up with a tree in a park, I'm generally observing what's going on with the rest of the trees.
And I guess these aren't generally things that happen like that. develop over time and.
Not usually, sometimes
usually,
a little
well.
faster than others, but not
Sure,
usually,
all
yeah.
right, all right, thank you very much.
Jumping in on that, one of the things concurrently, what we're further developing the sort of the maintenance regime around parks. We have our maintenance workers in the parks multiple times a week, and they will have a bit of a checklist of things to look at.
I was wondering, does it need to be?
Yeah, to
John,
look
or
at
can
look
the
at trees,
maintenance-
and obviously they're not going to have John's same eye, but if they see something, a branch hanging or something like that, that would be a trigger to get John involved.
Thanks.
I saw Commissioner Martin, did you have a comment?
So I had a question for the Ocean View Park. So what's motivating the aggressive approach to removing these trees? I heard you say it a number of times that they're pretty aggressive. What's motivating that?
The consultant, you mean? They're finding defects in trees that are typically trees that you would want to remove and replace. If these trees were in your front yard, you would probably want to get rid of it and put something that's going to grow better and look nicer there. From my perspective, if it's not a risk to the public or the park goers in these cases, I'm trying to hang on to the tree as long as possible.
Makes sense.
I think that's more the better ecological approach.
I agree.
To managing trees than just taking it down because it looks kind of ugly, or, I get many requests to remove a tree because it's dropping leaves or this or that, and, I have to explain that we keep our trees as long as is practical. So, yeah.
Didn't we lose a really huge tree in Terrace Park a few years ago? Recall some.
A camphor, yeah. I think it was probably next to this tree.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's something, either groundwater patterns have changed, or there's some fungal thing or something going on in the soil on that area, because there was that tree removed, this next one's going to be removed, and the other one is not looking too well at this point.
Just a small point or question. I noticed that you in your document that you talked about this area originally being like prairie-like, and I had never heard of the landscape being like described like that. And I think you said, no, did you say prairie? I think you said prairie.
Yeah,
Grassland.
that's right.
Yeah, and so I thought that was really interesting. And so often I'm like, trees, we need like urban tree canopy, and then I didn't really think, oh, actually maybe. And so how does that affect I just haven't heard that come up before when we're talking about treescape. So how does that affect your lens or your planning?
That's sort of just a background bit of information.
Yeah.
We live in an artificially developed environment, so we get a lot of requests for native trees. With our street tree management plan, there was many comments from the public about, we need more native trees. There weren't native trees here. There weren't many at all. So, and actually the non-native trees seem to do better. They can adjust better. Some of them are hardier, not always, but for the small spaces and the urban stresses that trees go through, a lot of these trees are better suited for that. So
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Similar with the hill. That's part of the struggle with the hill. I think where we have the live oaks on the hill, that's where we had trees, but the rest of that hill was more than likely grass and shrubs. So.
Thank you, John. And I'm assuming are there comments from the public? Hands raised.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll go to them.
Okay, that was weird. The hand was raised and now it's gone. Lucinda, did you want to speak, or was that an accident?
Looks like she came back.
It's not showing that her hand is raised on my end.
Oh.
It popped up there, but it's not showing here. Lucinda, if you want to speak, can you raise your hand one more time, please? I'm just going to click on it. Okay, Lucinda, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I did raise my hand, at least the icon is showing on my screen, so I'm not sure what the problem is. Thank you very much. I wanted to thank Mr. Hawkridge for the presentation. And I am one of those people who has asked for native trees to be considered because native trees are our best hope of addressing the biodiversity crisis. You did make a comment, and I know there has been a lot of discussion. I'm part of the Albany Climate Action Coalition. There's been a lot of discussion, people making comments to the effect that our Albany was predominantly meadows, and so native trees aren't really a concern. And I am not an ecologist, but we have had presentations at the Albany Climate Action Coalition from very knowledgeable people who are ecologists. And my understanding is that this was not, at the time that Albany was settled, it was predominantly meadows and prairie, but that we are in an ecosystem that is in flux. And at 500 years ago, it may very well have had heavily treed. So I think and again, I am not an expert in this area, but my understanding is that at only one point in time were we predominantly prairie. And there are a lot of native trees in our area. And if you look at El Cerrito, San Francisco, many other cities who are in our same ecosystem, those cities do emphasize the importance of native trees. And it does concern me that our street tree list only has one native tree, as I understand it. Whereas if you look at El Cerrito, San Francisco, many other cities who really have appreciated the importance of native have many native trees on their street tree list, or several. And I understand, I'm not going to get into the whole street tree because I understand there are many, many considerations that go into selection of street trees. But I do take issue with this view that we don't need to be concerned about natives because we were Albany in the 1850s or 1800s was predominantly prairie. And natives are extremely important to deal with our loss of biodiversity. Trees in general are very, very important to deal with climate crisis. So I wish Dan Johnson, who is on the Albany Climate Action Coalition and who is very knowledgeable on this and has degrees in ecology, and so I wish he was here to speak because he could certainly explain it much better than I could. But thank you very much.
Thank you. And that's all the hands that are raised.
Thank you for your comment. And I think we had one, did you have one last thing?
Oh, yeah, a couple, well, just open up for discussion. So one thing was, two things that I wanted to bring up. One was, you mentioned that liquid ambers in the parking lot at Ocean View, you pruned to try to help maintain them better. And I thought, just as one little data point, that sounds great to me. And sometimes from the public, we hear that the city has it out for liquid ambers completely, that the city just wants to cut down every liquid amber whenever it can. So it was, I thought it was good to hear that the city is actively trying to maintain and preserve whatever trees, including liquid ambers. So that was that. Another comment, you mentioned the grove of redwoods and that, the smoke goes up from the barbecues and it's really dense in there, and it is really dense in there. So it's really dark in there, and I think the experience. So I would be all for thinning some of that. So I know you said I want to preserve every tree and even the one that's really crowded out, and so there's something to be said. I took a 1-week workshop as a teacher, as in forest management and ecology, so I consider myself an expert now. And so part of what they talked about was managing the forest, which is way more in vogue than just letting the forest be with all the wildfire problems. And I'm not saying that little grove of trees is a wildfire risk or anything, but nothing about fire really at all, but just so crowded that if some of those trees were removed, if it was thinned, it would provide light for the remaining trees. It would provide, more water would be available to the other trees. It would provide light down to the bottom. It's so dark in that area. And allow the smoke to leave from the barbecues and things like that. I think, so I would recommend, I would be all for doing some thinning. How much would that actually look like? I don't know, but I would encourage that.
That's not a bad thought. I think the darkness is part of the value of the grove there, though, the shade, but thinning that out might be a good thought. I'll have to take a look at that and maybe bring that back to you guys and we can discuss it. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Is there any further discussion on this presentation? All right, John, well, thank you so much. Thanks for your work on this. We're going to transition now into presentation number 4 on the emergency tree removals that happened recently. So I'll hand it over to you, John. Thank you.
Okay. Just to segue from the liquid amber comments. Liquid ambers are also a tree that do cause some damage and do drop some scary limbs often. So with that, we had removed a couple trees since the last time I spoke to this group. There was a tree at 611 Santa Fe, which was a fairly mature liquid amber tree. On June 23rd, basically half of the crown split out of the tree. When I got there, can we show the pictures? Move forward. That's basically what it looked like when I got there. That tree was more or less symmetrical before I got there, or an hour or so before that. Next picture. This is just a picture of the tree. The black part there is where the tree ripped out. And it landed on, this shows it cut up a little bit. I think the fire department did some work here. But the tree got hung up, that section of the tree got hung up in another section of the tree. Next picture. And that's what was left of the part where the tree ripped out. And when I got there and I saw that, for one, I couldn't leave that there. If we just removed that section, we would have a deformed half to a third of a tree left. So we decided to remove the tree completely. We spoke to residents there, neighbors. They were all pretty much happy that that tree was being removed. So that's that for that. That tree will be replanted. I think we already discussed this with the property owner to replant with a red maple tree also. Okay, the next one was at 648 San Pablo. This was what, the night that I was leaving for vacation. I get a call that a limb came down on San Pablo, and this is what I found there. A really large limb came down. As you can see, did some damage to a car. Next slide. More damage. Next slide. Okay, so this is a similar situation where the tree ripped out. It left a really narrow, I don't have a good picture of it, but it was less than half of the diameter of what was left of the main leader of that tree. This tree came down across 2 lanes of San Pablo Avenue. I couldn't leave that tree in that condition, so we had that tree removed also. And both of these trees were pruned previously for risk reduction. The 611 Santa Fe I didn't mention was pruned back in 2020, which is a little while ago, but it's hard to you know, prune these trees every year. We have 270 liquid ambers in the city, and we try to keep on top of it, but it was pruned at some point for risk reduction. The tree on San Pablo was pruned last year, actually, for risk reduction, and there was a damaged limb in the tree. I think, I'm not sure if it was a tree that was hit by a truck or something, but we had a limb removed. We had the tree, the weight and weight reduction pruning done on the trees to lessen the risk of something like this happening, but there's no guarantees with that. So that was removed. That will be replaced more than likely with a scarlet oak, which has been the tree of choice for San Pablo Avenue. It's our San Pablo Avenue master plan lists the red oak as the replacement tree, but the red oak doesn't seem to do as well as the scarlet oak, which is also a type of red oak, scarlet red oak. So the scarlet oaks seem to be doing well, so that'll be the replacement there. And next, 1100 Pomona. This is another one. I was going on vacation too or something. At 5 o'clock or so, Friday night, I get a call, the tree, apparently a truck backed into this tree. I don't have a picture of it being knocked over because I was on my way to vacation. So I just went out there, cleaned it up, and got out of there. But this is a tree that years ago, what did I say, 2018, I had pruned it. You can see how it looks all lopsided because it was just, it was leaning, growing out into the street. And the next photo is from 2022, and a little bit more what it looked like this year before it got hit by a truck. And it was just, you know, just a hit and run kind of thing. We know that it was hit by a vehicle because I found pieces of tail lights that I left for Mark on his desk. So, so he could see what happened there. And when I saw the tree too, it broke pretty cleanly right at the ground level. So there was some kind of root decay going on with it, but it was whacked by a truck. This has a lean, but not really sticking out into the road. I mean, I don't know if a truck backed into it or came around that corner. This is a corner tree and hit it. Whatever, the tree's gone, and we'll replant that tree. So those are the emergency removals. Any questions?
When's your next vacation schedule? It's like,
Yeah.
Monday.
Are there any trees?
Monday, don't.
Wait, that's from the Jackson Street.
Monday and
removals.
Tuesday, I'm off.
I don't know who approved that.
All right. I have a question. Maybe it's a little outside the scope of this, but you can decide. Does the city have like a really clear plan of action when it comes to a limb falling on a car and you're like, I feel like you have to kind of handle so many things at once. Is that like the city pretty experienced with that?
Fairly so.
It's a pretty much a team effort. A lot of times calls will come, during the daytime. Calls will come to us during after hours. Usually goes to dispatch. Dispatch will send the fire department, who depending on when it is. Like if it's in the middle of the night, fire department will go stabilize it. We'll also call the on-call public works person that will then further stabilize it. Maybe, take things out of the roadway, put up barricades, and then we would queue up the next day for a contractor to come in and either clear the branches or if we need to take down a tree, do that work. So it's a lot of things going on at once.
Okay. Thank you.
Adrenaline takes care of it.
And your
limb down,
urgency.
everybody starts jumping.
Your urgency to get on your vacation, right? Thank you. Any further comments? Questions? Any questions from the public at this point?
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. Okay, we can go to discussion by the commission.
I would just note that how many of those trees were liquid ambers? So liquid ambers can drop major limbs and cause major problems. Was it 2 of the 3?
2 of the 3, yeah.
What happens with the car that the limb fell on? Did they put a claim against the city, or?
Typically, yes, yeah. From there, I don't know, our claims people handle that, so.
Like you had a comment.
No, it does, so when things like that, it does happen. We get a claim, we submit the reports on history of pruning and whatever information we have, and then we have a claims adjuster type company that evaluates it and then works out the claim side.
I'll just make a note for maybe like a street safety conversation happening at another commission. That's like definitely one of my regular walking paths, like around that corner. And it feels like a very wide corner. So it makes sense. Like, I understand that a car would maybe, obviously not in their right mind, would turn that corner and then hit the tree, which is not leaning out. It's just such a wide right turn. And yeah, walking there, like, I actively will avoid, I kind of do a weird route there for safety reasons. And that intersection in particular.
I think it was a van or a truck or something.
Yeah, I'm talking about that one right there.
So
Pomona and I don't know what the cross street is.
That was hit, you sure?
Dartmouth, yeah, Dartmouth, yeah.
Dartmouth, of course, yeah. Okay, that was my only comment. Anything else? Okay, well, thank you, John. Thank you. And that concludes the presentations. We're going now into the quarterly review of street tree removal applications, and there's one for 1454 Portland Avenue.
Okay, this is a street tree removal application for 1454 Portland Avenue for a liquid amber. Application was submitted by the property owner after a large limb fell on their property and it hit their neighbor's electrical service drop. Okay. Previously, according to the neighbor in 2013, a similar situation happened where a very large limb fell and it hit their neighbor's service drop and it ripped everything off the neighbor's house. So next slide. So this tree was also pruned. Next slide. This is the tree. Yeah, that is the tree. This tree was pruned in August 2023 before the limb failure as part of a risk reduction pruning project. Had been pruned again in January to reduce the risk of further failure. Several issues remain that cannot be resolved through risk reduction pruning. Next slide. Here are photos of the recent limb that broke out of this tree. Part of the issue with this is that this tree in the past had been completely topped. Every single limb had been stubbed back to, it's hard to say, half of its length. And that creates this resprouting, and you can see better in the picture on the left, these kind of lighter bark, smoother barked branches are actually resprouts growing out of a stub of a tree. Often these branches grow, they're weakly connected, There's sometimes decay in that zone where the tree was stubbed off and branches are growing out. In this case, we see a little bit of black marking on the where the limb broke, which indicates that the limb was growing with too close of a branching union. This is the included bark. The black is just where the bark of the one branch, or in this case, the main trunk, and the other limb that was growing out of it were growing too close together. Next picture, next slide. This is a photo from 2015. I'm not sure who did this or why, but I think it was related to the limb that broke out. I think the reaction was to just cut everything way back on the tree. So this is the beginning of several problems with this tree. Next slide. Here we can see where what I've later discovered, the limb that broke was actually the main stem of this tree that was growing in the center of the tree that broke out. It was cut. You can see where it was cut, so it broke out a little bit higher from there. It's hard to say exactly where. But if we look at the next slide, what I discovered when I got up there, I took a ladder out there and went up to take a look at that cut. And this tree has significant decay. I was just pulling out chunks of wood from that cut area, which led me to be very concerned about this tree, particularly because of the three major stems that are growing out from basically that spot where the tree is fairly well decayed. I'm actually surprised that the limb that broke was far away from this zone, and it wasn't one of these entire major stems growing out of this section. Do we have another picture here? So again, that's my bad photography of the decay in the tree. The tree's growing under high voltage power lines, so when it does spread out and grow up again, PG&E is coming through and pruning it. Next slide. So these are just pictures, again, of where the tree was previously topped and where some other limbs had broken off in the past. I don't know, I can't say when these limbs broke, but I can see evidence that this tree has lost several limbs, and they're mostly in the area where the tree was topped and these new limbs had been growing out. Next slide. This shows you all of these branches growing except for the horizontal one on the bottom are just sucker growth coming out of the tree because it had been tipped off in the past. And the arrow is pointing to a secondary stub cut on the tree where there's some decay in that section of the tree too. Basically, this tree, is there another photo here? Here's some more. There's another area you can see. The arrow is pointing to where there was actually a limb ripped out, and below it is where a limb was cut off, and it's partially healed over, but that's another weak attachment on this tree. Basically, this tree is loaded with these weak attachments, decay, stubs, but the main issue, again, is that main trunk where the decay is, and the three main sections of this tree are growing out from there. And I feel that this tree should be approved for removal. Are there more? There's more. Secondary to this, there's sidewalk lifting. There's large roots growing out towards the house here. More? I forgot how many slides I made here. Here, it's just the photos. You can see the tree lifting the sidewalk. The sidewalk was repaired in the past, according to the property owner. I'm not sure what the date was on that. Here you can see it lifting the street, the curb. Again, this zone that I have circled here is the section that's really of concern. There's a lot of weight in those branches there, and they're at risk of failure. And with the history and the current condition of this tree, I recommend that the application be approved. Is there more?
Thank you, John.
That's it.
Are there any questions for John?
I had one question. You mentioned that part of the issue with the tree was that there was aggressive pruning to prevent it from hitting the power lines, from PG&E doing that. Does the city, do you recommend smaller trees? Well, typically power lines are on one side of the street and not on the other side of a street.
Yeah.
Do you recommend, is that part of our policy to recommend smaller trees on the power line side of the street?
Yeah, definitely. Our accepted street tree list, it'll indicate whether or not the tree is suitable for planting on the high voltage power lines.
All right.
I worked with PG&E on their power line clearance program for years, so I understand how that happens. And we don't want to plant.
So liquid ambers, are they on the list of approved trees to plant under power lines now?
They're not.
They're not, okay. Okay, that's all I had.
They're not on our list.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
What happens with this is general to all removals, like what happens with the sidewalk that's being lifted, like, and the roots, because you're removing the tree, but what about those roots that are just part of the sidewalk now?
That's a great question for this particular location. It was repaired this week.
Like the sidewalk itself?
Repaired, yeah. It was on our sidewalk repair program. So I believe when they repair the sidewalk, they remove what they need to for roots or shave roots down. In this case, the contractor was aware that this was up for removal. So yeah, the roots were removed. They will remain a problem though, because liquid amber roots continue to grow.
Even if the tree was removed?
Even after a tree is removed.
Oh.
Someone asked a question about eucalyptus root sprouting.
Right.
Not so much, but liquid amber do that. So.
Wow.
It's the gift that keeps on giving, it sounds like.
It's like a lizard whose tail falls off or something.
Sort of, yeah.
Okay. Any further questions? Yes, Jeremy?
So I guess assuming that the contractor knew it was going to be removed, maybe they weren't as careful with the root removal. So I guess like if trees stay there, it's going to be a problem in the future.
I think they used our standard practice. They removed what really needed to be removed on larger roots that, 2 inches or smaller. Usually it's okay to remove a root like that, but larger diameter roots, they'll shave it down to the level where they needed to be able to replace the concrete.
Can I jump in there? There's actually a sort of flow chart of things we do on the sidewalk repair side to, the idea is to eliminate the sidewalk root conflict, and that would include ramping, so we can ramp up, we can ramp down, we can bend the sidewalk around and give it a little more room, and if we can get by without touching the roots. And a lot of this, we really don't know until we pull everything up and see where the roots, because sometimes it's just displaced soil that's pushing the sidewalk around. So pruning the roots is sort of the last resort. So I would imagine even in this case, because we do just follow that process.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any public comments?
I was giving people a chance to raise their hands. I have no hands raised online.
Okay. Mr. Maria?
We did have an email from the property owner, and I believe
Oh, I see where it says public comment. Okay.
previously their neighbor, or they forwarded a neighbor's email, I think. Also, I don't know if that came in the last email.
I did attach it to this agenda, yes.
That's the neighbor's email? I'm confused.
I'm not sure where it came from, but I did attach it to
Okay.
the public
I
comment.
see. Yes, thank you. Okay, well, is there any further discussion? Oh, for this, we'll need a vote, right? So, is there any discussion before we ask for a motion? Okay, do we have a motion to approve the recommendation from the city to remove the tree?
I'll move to approve the tree removal application.
You have a second?
A second? Oh, go ahead, Martin.
Okay.
Seconded.
Commissioner Abbott?
Yes.
Commissioner Chang Frank?
Yes.
Commissioner Chin?
Yes.
Commissioner Kent?
Yes.
Commissioner Martin?
Yes.
Commissioner OG?
Yes.
And Chair Seinberg?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Thank you, John.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We're coming to the
Go to
end.
vacation.
What? Yeah, finally. We're coming to the end here. Just for subcommittee updates, as far as the mini park subcommittee, there's I can share the update from you, Mark, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is Mark's gonna do some research on the possible turf materials, and just because of the way that, well, one of the requests that we had, our recommendations was this, was putting a, what do we call it? Kind of like a bounce.
Rubberized surface.
A rubbery surface, right, but the way that you put that in when there's already equipment there, like, it's understandable where in the places where they've removed the equipment, it's sort of like a flat, just pave it, rubberize it, but then there are other pieces that are there. So do you lift them? Do you go around them? And so Mark's going to be looking into that a bit.
Yeah, so we had hoped to have some of this information already developed, but things got a little out of control over the summer, and we had a lot of other work we were working on. But the idea is get with a more holistic estimate of what it would take to do the rubberized service through the whole area, and this is sort of more than just a replacement of the equipment, but sort of a refresh of that area.
And so, like, are you also simultaneously going to look at whether the other equipment is possible, or?
So, yes, I think that's the idea of looking at it more than just replacement of equipment at the spaces that were removed.
Yeah. And so I think we were thinking you'd share maybe in October, so that in November would throw the capital. Oh, well, this goes probably nicely into the next piece. So we can transition into that unless Mark's essentially going to give an update on kind of like an overview of what the remaining agendas look like for the year. And so he'll touch on the subcommittee in a moment, but just any last comments or questions about the subcommittee work?
You had talked about kind of expanding the area a little bit. Is that still being considered, or?
We might have presented on that the first time, but the second time around, we zoomed in on the square that is that dirt patch. Correct me if I'm wrong, fellow subcommittee
So this is where the
members.
workout equipment is, rather
Yeah.
than where the logs are, the whatever.
Yeah, not that or on the other side.
Bite-sized piece that can be done, otherwise.
I know we talked about potentially taking out those logs or doing something. Those get used a lot.
Yeah.
They really do. It might have been particularly the preschool right across the street. So
Great.
I wouldn't recommend
Great.
changing those. But this is a good segue into sort of planning out the agendas for the remainder of the year. So we have 3 meetings, and we have a lot on our plates for. So what I see happening on October 10th, we're gonna have the street tree management plan coming before, and this is be a draft version of it. We're gonna do it in 2 meetings. With the first meeting on the 10th would be the findings and analysis, so it would be the canopy assessment, the inventory, current program review, costs, and so that would be setting a baseline. With that, we would also do another quarterly tree removal. The one we had tonight was actually July's, so want to stay on track on that. I think John might have 2, maybe 3 trees that came in. Then on the 14th, I'm programming that we would have the second part of the street tree management plan, and this would be sort of a draft policy recommendations that would be building off the first meeting. Andre will be here doing a update to the Prop 68 projects. So we're going to issue the contract for the dog park, and we made progress on the other ones. So it's just going to be more of an overall update on it. He'll also talk about the linear park, the Albany Linear Park.
You're on November. When you said and the 14th.
November 14th.
You meant November.
Okay, you're
Yes,
right.
14th, November 14th, sorry. And then the last meeting of the year, December 12th, we're going to have program a park maintenance update. As you recall, Razu's no longer with the city, and so we missed the one we had in June. I want to get back on cycle. I've been digging into it a little, actually a lot, and wanted to be probably more focused on some of the challenges we're having, trash management, graffiti in the parks, and what we're doing and how we're changing things up to hopefully better manage it. Then we would also have a CIP presentation. So we've been wanting to kick off this update to the CIP. So we want to come talk to the commission. This will be Allison Creo. I think you've had a present, maybe not. Allison's our CIP program manager, and so she would come and talk about the program. And the idea is not necessarily to, hey, what projects do you want to do? It's more of coming up with a list of things that we think need to be done that are based in the Parks Master Plan, deferred capital reinvestment that we need to do in parks, some of the other things that we're seeing that need to be addressed. So it's feedback on priorities of what the projects that we want to be tackling over the next 5 years. And clearly, if there's something that maybe we want to focus on, raise that of, hey, let's, this is an important thing that's not on your list, let's add it to the list. So the idea with the master or the CIP is once you get things on the list, we can start scoping it, we can start digging into it, and then that gets into the queue of regularly executing projects. So this, I'm really looking forward to this. And then finally, we would have the fair play and community sports presentation. That's the same one that we had last December. And then I think we also have to be flexible, because depending on what we do with the Albany Hill project, it might come back here, or it might be some other sort of community type meeting. So we have a schedule.
It was just through December, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so the CIP was a December agenda item?
December
potentially?
agenda.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're looking for suggestions?
You're right. And are there additional future agenda item requests? If you dare, may dare. I'm just
I
kidding.
mean, I do want to just plant the seed about the sand volleyball court that we proposed, and, it was like, I felt like the response from the city council was kind of like, you guys got that in your budget. So I'm not saying that we actually do, but I'm just wondering, when is a good time to discuss something like that?
CIP.
Okay.
We in fact, I think we are already programming to include that in the CIP.
cool.
I think it's a really good location.
So that's in the December meeting.
Yeah, and we're not going to go into detail of any one thing. It's going to be, I could see, the things that stick out to me are the tennis courts at Terrace Park need to be refreshed. We have the volleyball court. There's a whole host of things like that I think are going to be on the CIP that, here's a collection of projects. How are we going to attack these?
A couple quick follow-up things. One is, you mentioned the Albany, that there's going to be some sort of presentation on something that's planned there.
So this would be the subcommittee work, where we're developing the costs to refresh that
That
exercise
area.
equipment.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. And then also Measure M, I believe that bond measure that is used for maintaining parks needs to be aired out at least twice a year for
I don't
public?
think there's that specific requirement, but we do post all the spending on our website. So every time we complete the audit, we update that on what we spent, and there's always a balance between what we're spending on sort of the operational side and then what we're holding in reserve for capital expenditures.
So we always appreciate getting that update. We've always had it twice a year in the past. That's been the past practice, and I thought that was a requirement, but I could be wrong.
It wasn't a specific requirement. We've talked about that in, just how we're spending that money. And we can, as part of the maintenance thing, we can always, check on the, put that information or, bring up the website to show how it's being used. But by large part, it funds, a fair amount of our ongoing maintenance work in the parks, as well as its matching funds for the Prop 68 projects. One of the things we did with it this year is we, every year or so, we do a safety review of the playground equipment. This year, we replaced like $40,000 worth of features on the playground equipment that needed to be addressed. So.
And then you mentioned capital improvement, brainstorming those things. That sounds great. I think the phase 1 projects of our master plan, sounds like some of them will be done in the fall for Prop 68, and I think the rest will be done in 2025.
Prop 68 projects?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Andre can tell us at the November meeting.
But just so that was phase 1 of our Parks Master Plan. So I think it is a great idea to have an agenda item soon, brainstorming for what we want to prioritize for the next things that are in the Parks Master Plan or other ideas people have.
So I think some of the things that are recalling the items that are in the we had I think it was 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 year, and then 5 to 7 type, and we've ticked off a lot of the things in the first phase. Some of them are the Prop 68 projects getting constructed. Some of the things are more programmatic, like I think it was completion of the active transportation plan and things. So some of them that are capital related, I think we would absolutely discuss as part of the CIP piece, and then some of the other things that are more programmatic, maybe we find a different meeting to discuss where we are in those. So it seems like they're
different.
They're kind of both included in the master plan, but some get handled a little differently.
Okay, well, thanks for helping us know what's coming on the horizon, even if there are adjustments, roughly knowing what's on the docket. I think is really helpful for us and for the public. So thank you, Mark and Jamira, very much. So that brings us, so our next meeting is October 10th. I won't be here, but Commissioner Todd will be chairing. And so, but I am here in November and December as far as I can see. We're at adjournment, and thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your week.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.